I love my brothers and sisters, but I tell you something, I strum from a different drum. Same family, but my spirit and mind just didn't want that life, you know.
People thought she was crazy. Some people thought she was crazy. But she was crazy because she spoke out for what she believed in. And at the time, when you're living in Mississippi, where there was a lot of segregation going on, you didn't speak out against the mainstream without raising eyebrows and people thinking you were crazy.
Now, Marge Baroni, she was a Baptist, and she was a Protestant, and she was from New Orleans. And in New Orleans, Louisiana, there's people that are more a little more open-minded. She was raised in a more open-minded, artistic, art, music, things like that, even though she was poor, but she was raised in a consciousness that was much greater than living in Natchez, Mississippi.
So, Marge Baroni is my grandmother who was quite an activist. She didn't start off as an activist. She was a sharecropper's daughter, and my grandmother was very much ahead of her time. Growing up, I remember a lot of her as a young kid, not a baby, but was a little 4 or 5 year old, 6-year-old, that sort of age group. I can tell you she was a very kind lady who was also very conservative in a lot of ways in how she carried herself. And my grandmother started off working for the Natchez Democrat, I believe, which is out of Natchez, Mississippi. And she had a bit of an epiphany of how unfair it was that African Americans and people of color weren't allowed to worship in the same church as white people in that sense. And my grandmother wrote about it. And when she wrote about it, my grandfather told me that she lost a large portion of friends who she thought she had friends almost the next day after it was actually sent out. People stopped calling her, stopped talking to her, and so she was stereotyped and basically ostracized in some ways for her beliefs and her beliefs in her beliefs that go back that were ahead of her time in the sense that she believed people were people and people should be treated fairly regardless of the color of their skin.
She would get so emotional and so upset and so angry at some of these things that were done to these people. And, she didn't know how to channel it off of her, and she carried it inside. That was her life. She was constantly in her mind, in her head, and physically putting out energy for these people, and her children had to fend for the children raised the family, pretty much. And she gave up her life, and she fought for them all the way through. No matter what our personal things were, she never gave up on those people, not ever.
My mom was most of the people in the South that my mom's family comes from were very hardcore Southerners, okay, and they were very much anti-African American at the time, or anti-black, and there were a lot of prejudices and lots of discrimination.
This is on my side of the family now. My Uncle Sonny, who was Billy Farrell, he was raised Catholic, and as he got older and had his own mind, he became, I think, a Methodist. I think they were Methodists. So, people change their religion, which changed their way of thinking also. He was a very honorable man and very impeccable, and he was in the war. He was in World War II, I think, and he got honorable medals and everything during that war. So when he came back, he settled down in Natchez, Mississippi. So anyway, Uncle Sonny came back, and he was very well liked and honored because of his duties and what he did in the war. And He wanted them to be involved with the law. My grandfather, Farrell, he left his kids at an early age when they were little, and Uncle Sonny was, my mother was the oldest, and then my Uncle Sonny was under her. And so he wanted to make something more out of his life, so he was studying law, and he became an assistant to like the sheriff at that time, and the sheriff, Connors, I think his name was. And he had been a sheriff for years and years and years and years and years. And when my Uncle Sonny came back, he studied under Sheriff Connors, and he became his assistant, and eventually he became sheriff of Natchez. And he was sheriff up until I was like married and gone, and he was still sheriff. So everyone liked him, and he was honorable. He did some things that I don't know if all the stories are true, but he had a hard time with the civil rights movement there because he was in between both sides and of the law. The state law was on the side of the white people, racism, and the federal law was on for people, just people, period. And Uncle Sonny was a state law, so he was caught in between. One story, which will explain that. So, okay, where Marjorie lived, and we were staying that summer, she lived on the railroad track. Her house was right on the side of the railroad track, and that divided the whites part of town from the blacks part of town. So what happened was during that particular time that we were staying there, Neil was a baby, and we had gone, and that one night, I first got there, my Uncle Sonny, I went to see them, and he told me, Betty, I don't want you to stay at the Baroni's house. And I said, why? And he said, because I have fear that they're going to be bombed. And he says, I don't want you there. And I said, if they bomb that house, Uncle Sonny, I'm not leaving it. They're going to have to bomb us too. Because I'm not leaving it. They haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not leaving it. And he really tried to get me to leave, take my children, and leave. And I wouldn't do it. So that night, there was a riot in the black part of town. They were so angry that they started just burning everything and throwing bombs and, those kind you make with a bottle and a piece of rag. This particular night, we could hear the guns, we could see the smoke, and Grandpa Baroni and Grandma Baroni and Neil and probably my cousins, my sisters-in-laws, who were really little at the time, they were all sitting on a porch swing. There's like this house is huge, and it has two great big verandas. Those are big porches, and they're screened in, and they have swings on them. And so downstairs, they were all downstairs, and the living room windows were like 12 feet high, and they would lift all the way up so you could walk onto the veranda like a door. The windows became like doors. And so in the summertime, they often raise those because they have those big screen porches, and everybody sits out at nighttime on the porches and talk and look at the stars and stuff. All of a sudden, we hear this car drive up, and it's driving on the railroad track, and it drives right up to our house, and the next thing we know, there's these white guys in the car, and they have a gun, and they shoot it, and the bullet goes right between me and Philip's head. And just got really scary and hysterical, and the whole family was scared, and I thought about my uncle telling them they're going to bomb us, and so we were really lived in fear that night. No one slept. We were sick at our stomachs. It was horrible. And after that night, I told Neil's dad that we had to leave. I said, I'm not going to have my children killed staying here. So we left the next day or so. And it calmed down, and the riot calmed down, but they were going to kill. That's what they said, that they were going to bomb Baroni, Marjorie. They wanted to kill Marjorie. to give an idea of my side of the family, and they're not bad people, but basically my family, my great-grandfather, which would be Neil's great-great-grandfather, he rode in the Ku Klux Klan. That part of life is the way the South was at that time. And, I mean, yes, there were bad people, but they didn't know they were bad people. They were just living what they thought they were supposed to live like.
But my mom was kind of different. She fell in love with my father and then connected with my grandmother through my father. And my grandmother taught my mom a lot about people and about equalities and, you know, to look beyond the skin and the color of the skin.
What I think so wonderful about everything, I'm just sitting here, you know, listening to all this family tree stuff and how it's all tied together to get us to where we are today. In thinking about this whole thing with my side of the family being on one side of the railroad tracks, and the Ronnie side of the family being on the other side of the tracks, right? Isn't it wonderful that Butch, your dad, me, your mom, went against all odds that were against us, and came together and tied two different, absolute opposite ways of thinking in life, and brought them together and had you wonderful children.
Thanks, Mom.